I love to watch the sunrise from the veranda of my house. At 72, there are many things you begin to appreciate differently. The silence of early morning, the first rays of sunlight reflecting on the bay waters, the birds singing in my garden. Fort Myers became my home 20 years ago when Lydia and I decided to move to Florida after I retired. At the time, we thought it would be the beginning of our new life, peaceful and happy. It was, as long as Lydia was alive. 5 years ago, cancer took her and everything changed. Not only my life, but the way my only son Brandon treated me. The sun had already risen above the horizon, and I went back into the house. My breakfast is always the same: oatmeal with fruit, avocado toast, and a cup of strong coffee. Lydia laughed at my predictability, but it is in these simple rituals that I now find solace. After breakfast, I tackled my garden. I am especially proud of the orchids, of which I already have over 30 species in my collection. Lydia started growing them once, and I continued after her death. At first, it was a way to keep her memory alive, but gradually I became fascinated, began to visit exhibitions, and share my experience with other collectors. Working in the garden is always satisfying. Here you see the result of your labors, and no one can devalue it. Unlike relationships with people, especially with your own family. A phone call interrupted my thoughts. My son's name popped up on the screen. Our conversations had gotten shorter and more formal in recent years. Brandon called when he needed something, usually money. "Hey, Dad, how's your health?" His voice sounded unusually cheerful, which immediately alerted me. "Hello, Brandon. I'm fine. Thanks." I sat down on the garden bench preparing to talk. "Great. I have great news. Trevor proposed to his girlfriend. You remember Chloe? You met her last Christmas." I vaguely remembered the cute blonde girl my grandson introduced as his girlfriend. They'd been dating for about a year, as far as I knew. "Yes, of course I remember. Congratulations to them. We're all very happy, and we want to celebrate. I made reservations at the Côte d'Azur for Friday. Family dinner, nothing fancy, but a nice place. You're coming, right?" Azur is one of the most expensive restaurants in all of Fort Myers. Nothing special there, cost at least $200 a person, if not more. "Who's going to be at the dinner?" I asked, trying to get a sense of the scale of the event. "Oh, just the immediate family. Veronica and I, Trevor and Chloe, her parents, and you, of course." I noticed that I was the last to be informed, but I decided not to emphasize it. "So, Brandon, the Côte d'Azur is expensive. Why don't we go somewhere a little more simple?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Dad, this is a big day for your grandson. Do you really want us to celebrate in some diner?" "Besides," his voice softened, "I remember how you always said that nothing is too small for family." Those words hurt me. Yes, I did say that, and I did spare nothing, neither money, nor time, nor love. But in recent years, it seemed more and more often that my family valued only the former. "Okay, I'll come," I finally agreed. "That's great. I knew I could count on you." The relief in his voice was all too evident. "Meet me at 7 o'clock on Friday night. And Dad," he paused, "put on something decent, okay? Chloe's parents are coming, and I don't want to be seen as a nuisance." After the conversation was over, I sat on the bench for a while, looking at my orchids. Brandon is now 45 years old and works at a law firm, but he hasn't made partner, although he's been promising to for 10 years. His wife Veronica hasn't worked since Trevor was born, though he's 24 now. When Lydia was alive, our son visited us regularly, often coming with Veronica and Trevor on weekends. We'd go fishing, have barbecues, just talk. After my wife died, things changed. First, the visits became less frequent, then they stopped altogether. Now we only saw each other on special occasions, and not always. I remember Brandon came to see me a month after Lydia's funeral. He was as depressed as I was, but the conversation quickly turned to other topics. "Dad, I don't think you should live alone in a house this big," he began then. "Veronica and I have discussed it, and maybe you could move in with us. We have a guest room. You'd be comfortable." I was touched by the concern, but declined. The house Lydia and I had chosen together held too many memories for me to leave. Besides, I valued my independence. "What will happen to this house?" Brandon asked then. "I'll live here as before." "But maybe you should sell it," my son suggested cautiously. The real estate market is booming. You could get good money. You could invest some of it for an extra pension. I didn't pay much attention to the conversation at the time. Only later did I realize that Brandon was interested in my financial situation, not my well-being, and I had a pretty good one. 30 years as a manufacturing engineer for a large industrial equipment company had provided me with a decent pension. In addition, Lydia and I had savings and several successful investments. After she died, I became the sole owner of all that wealth. I wasn't rich, but I had enough for a comfortable life and even some extravagances. Over the past 5 years, Brandon had asked me for financial help many times. At first, it was small sums, for car repairs, for a new computer for Trevor, for a vacation. Then the request got more serious. A year ago, he asked for help with the down payment on a new house, an impressive $60,000. I'd given him the money, though I was alarmed that he and Veronica had decided to buy a place they clearly couldn't afford. I got up from the bench and headed for the house. It was time to get ready for the evening astronomy class. I had taken up this hobby after Lydia's death. Every Tuesday we gathered at the Edison College Observatory, listened to guest lectures, and then watched the stars. My phone rang again. This time it was Veronica. "Hello, Samuel." Her voice was, as always, too cloying. "Brandon said you're coming over for dinner on Friday." "Oh, that's so wonderful." "Hello, Veronica." "Yes, of course I'll be there. I'm so excited. By the way, would you mind wearing your navy blue suit? The one you wore at Brandon's company anniversary party? It looks so elegant on you." I was surprised at the request. I didn't remember Veronica ever commenting on my closet. "Perhaps," I answered evasively. "Is there a reason?" "Oh, I just want everything to be perfect," she laughed. "Chloe's parents are very wealthy people, and, first impressions are so important." "I understand," I said dryly. "I'll try not to slip up." "Good, and also," she hesitated, "I was wondering if you could take that picture of you and the president of the company at the opening of the new plant. Chloe's parents are very impressionable about such things, and they have a family business. So that's what this is about. They want to impress the bride's parents with my status as a former successful engineer, and probably my money." "I'll see if I can find it," I replied, even though I knew exactly where the photograph was. "I have to go, Veronica. I'm getting ready for my astronomy class." "Oh, those stars of yours," she said, a slight disdain in her voice. "I don't know what you see in them. See you Friday." I hung up the phone and thought. Veronica had never been interested in my hobbies. Neither astronomy, nor orchids, nor my rare fishing trips with friends. Nor, for that matter, had Brandon in recent years. As I prepared to leave, I took another look around my cozy home. In the living room, a large picture hung on the wall. Lydia and I with the Grand Canyon in the background. Both of us smiling, happy and full of plans for the future. It was a year before her diagnosis. "What would you do if you were me?" I asked the photo, but of course I didn't get an answer. The evening in the astronomy club went as usual. Lecture about black holes, observations of Jupiter, leisurely conversations with like-minded people. Here I was perceived as an equal, valued for knowledge and experience, not for how much money I could give. On the way home, I was thinking about the upcoming dinner. Something told me it wasn't just a celebration of Trevor's engagement. Brandon and Veronica had a purpose, and I had little doubt it had to do with money. At home, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stepped out onto the porch. The Florida night sky was studded with stars. Somewhere out there, among those distant lights, perhaps there are worlds where parents and children understand each other better than on Earth. Thursday morning greeted me with bright sunshine and a call from Trevor. My grandson rarely communicated with me directly, usually through his parents, so the call surprised me. "Grandpa, hi." His voice sounded energetic and a little nervous. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Trevor. Congratulations on your engagement." "Oh, thank you. Yeah, Chloe and I are very happy." He paused. "Grandpa, I'm calling to make sure you're coming to dinner tomorrow. It's very important to me." "Yes, your father has already invited me. Of course I'll be there." "Oh, great." He's obviously excited. Grandpa, I wanted to ask you something. You see, Chloe's parents, they're very concerned about her future. They've been asking about our family, our prospects." I was starting to see where he was going with this. "What did you tell them?" Well, that my father is a successful lawyer and my grandfather is a former CTO of a large company. He sounded hopeful for my approval. I was never a CTO, Trevor. I was a lead process engineer. But that's almost the same thing, he exclaimed. Look, Grandpa, I just want them to see that I come from a good family, that Chloe will have a secure future. And you think it's okay to start a relationship by cheating? It's not cheating, he protested. It's just a little embellishment. Everyone does it. I sighed. My grandson was 24 years old, but he was talking like a teenager. It was my fault, though. Lydia and I had always overindulged Brandon, and he'd spoiled my son. Okay, Trevor. I'll be at dinner and try not to spoil the impression you want to make. Thanks, Grandpa. You're the best. His voice just got a little happier. Oh, and one more thing. Chloe and I are thinking about honeymooning in Bali. It's her dream, you know. But we're a little strapped for cash right now, and her parents are already paying for the wedding. That's it. Now I see why I needed to have dinner at an expensive restaurant, to wear my best suit and take pictures to prove my status. Trevor, I interrupted him, let's talk about this later, okay? I have to go now. Sure, Grandpa. See you tomorrow. He hurriedly said goodbye, apparently deciding that he had planted a seed in fertile ground. After that conversation, I decided to call my old friend Arthur. We had met in college, worked together at the same company, and then both moved to Florida. Arthur was the only person I could be completely honest with. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near the beach. Arthur, as always, arrived on time, tall, trim, with a neatly trimmed gray beard. Despite his 74 years, he remained active and full of energy. Aha, Sam, my friend. He shook my hand firmly. It's been a long time. How are you doing? We ordered coffee and I told him about the upcoming dinner and my suspicions. They're definitely up to something, Arthur nodded, listening to me. This sudden interest in your status, the expensive restaurant, the hints of financial assistance, it's a classic scheme. But why all this drama? I asked. Brandon knows I've never turned him down for help. Maybe the amount this time is higher than usual, Arthur suggested. Or are they trying to impress the bride's parents? Either way, be careful, Sam. Don't let them manipulate you. I wondered. Indeed, Brandon had been coming to me for money more and more often in recent years, and the amounts were steadily increasing. First, it was one-time loans that he promised to pay back, but never did. Then it was just requests for help. I rarely said no. After all, he is my only son. You know, Sam, Arthur continued, stirring his coffee, I never told you this, but I think you're spoiling them too much. Brandon's a grown man, in his 40s, and he still lives like he has unlimited credit from his dad. I just want him and his family to have the necessities, I argued, even though I knew in my heart that Arthur was right. Necessities? My friend grinned. A new house in an upscale neighborhood, expensive cars, a vacation in Bermuda. Is that necessary? Or is it a lifestyle that they can't afford, but still live at your expense? His words hurt me, but I couldn't help but recognize their truth. I remembered how Brandon had recently bragged about his new car, an impressive premium SUV. At the time, I'd thought maybe he'd gotten a promotion at work, but now I was beginning to doubt it. What do you suggest? I asked Arthur. Just open your eyes, Sam. Look at the situation objectively. Ask yourself, are they interested in you as a person or just in your wallet? He paused. And maybe it's time to teach them to appreciate what they have instead of always asking for more. After my meeting with Arthur, I took a long walk along the waterfront, thinking about our conversation. Perhaps I really had turned a blind eye to the obvious for too long. My family didn't see me as a father and grandfather, but only as a source of funding for their growing appetites. But tomorrow I'll have a chance to observe them from the outside, to see how they interact with Chloe's parents, what role they give me in this play, and then I'll make a decision. That evening, I got another call from Brandon. Dad, I hope you didn't forget about dinner tomorrow night. I could hear the impatience in his voice. Of course not. I'll be at the Azure at 7. Good. He was quiet. Listen, I was thinking, maybe you could pick us up. We could go together. What's the problem? Your new car broke down? I asked with an irony my son didn't seem to notice. No, I just thought it would be more convenient. But if you don't want to, we'll drive ourselves. I think that would be better. I'll see you at the restaurant. After that conversation, I was convinced that tomorrow's dinner was not just a family celebration, but a carefully planned performance in which I was assigned the role of a rich and generous grandfather, ready to pay for all the whims of his grandson. Well, I will play in this play, but by my own rules. Friday morning began with rain. Large drops drummed on the roof, and the sky was covered with gray clouds, rare weather for Fort Myers. I sat on the veranda, wrapped in Lydia's favorite woolen blanket, and watched the water dripping off the roof. It was at times like this that her absence was most keenly felt. After breakfast, I decided to get to work on my finances, an endeavor I had long put off. In my office in an old oak secretary, I kept all my documents, account statements, tax returns, investment reports. A lot had changed in the 5 years since Lydia's death, and not for the better. I spread the papers out on the table and began to organize the expenses. Most of the spending was transfers to Brandon, small amounts for everyday expenses, large ones for investments that never made a profit. Over the past 3 years, I had transferred over $200,000 to him and his family. That was a significant amount of money for me, even taking into account my savings, and it all started a long time ago. I remember the first time Brandon, as a teenager, asked me for money for a new bike. Not just any bike, but a professional mountain bike that cost a fortune back then. "Dad, you know how much I love to ride," he kept telling me. "With such a bike, I could even compete in competitions." So I bought him this bike. He rode it for a week, and then the bike got dusty in the garage until we gave it to charity. So it was repeated many times. A guitar, on which he never learned to play, a computer for programming, used only for games, an expensive camera, which he took only a couple of dozen pictures. But the real trouble began when Brandon went to college. Instead of focusing on his studies, he spent his time partying. And as a result, he almost dropped out after his freshman year. Lydia and I paid for his education, housing, food, and then private tutoring so he could catch up. When he decided to become a lawyer, we supported him in this as well. We paid for law school, internships, and bar exams. He got a job at a good firm, but his career didn't take off. He lacked diligence and attention to detail. Soon he married Veronica, Trevor was born, and the expenses only increased. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. Maybe it was Lydia and I's overprotective behavior and desire to provide the best for our son that had made him like this. We wanted to protect him from the hardships we'd gone through ourselves, but in the end, we'd raised a man who couldn't appreciate money or other people's efforts. My phone vibrated, a message from Arthur. "Pick you up at 6. I'll drop you off at the restaurant. Let me know how it went later." Arthur had always been an attentive friend. After Lydia's death, it was he who helped me cope with grief and loneliness. We often met for a game of chess or just to talk, and his advice was always wise and practical. I agreed and continued to sort through my papers. Among them, I found an old photo that Veronica had asked me to bring. The grand opening of a new factory, with me standing next to the president of the company. At that time, I was one of the key specialists who developed the new production line. We were recognized with bonuses and promotions, which seriously added to our savings. I remembered how proud I was of this accomplishment, how I showed Brandon the plant and explained that every bolt, every detail mattered. I wanted to instill in him a respect for labor, but he seemed to have learned a very different lesson, that Daddy would always make enough for the whole family. By noon, the rain had stopped and I decided to take a walk. The fresh air after the rain filled my lungs and the sky gradually cleared of clouds. I walked along the waterfront, watching the yachts and boats gliding along the water of the bay. Not far from the pier, I saw a young couple with a little girl. They were flying a kite, a simple but joyful activity. The girl laughed as the kite soared into the sky, and her parents looked on with genuine delight. This scene reminded me of when Brandon was little and we used to spend weekends together, the whole family. Back then, it seemed like our bond was unbreakable, that we would always be close. When did things change? Maybe when I started solving all his problems with money instead of teaching him independence? Or when he realized it was easier to ask his father for money than to earn it himself? Back home, I opened my closet and pulled out the navy blue suit Veronica had mentioned. I hadn't worn it since Brandon's company anniversary, The event at which my son had introduced me to his coworkers as a successful businessman who had helped him get a great education. At the time, those words had seemed like an expression of gratitude. Now I realized they were more of a way to impress my superiors. The suit still fit well, although I had lost a little weight in recent years. I topped it off with a white shirt and a maroon tie, a gift from Lydia for our last anniversary. While I was getting dressed, another text came in, this time from Brandon. I hope you remember to take the picture. Also, Chloe's parents' names are Richard and Pamela Courtney. He owns a construction company. She's a lawyer. Be nice to them. It's important to Trevor. I grinned. Be nice, as if I didn't know how to talk to people or could embarrass them in front of this important family. Though perhaps that was what they were afraid of, that the old father would say the wrong thing or, heaven forbid, tell them how the Harrington family really lived. By 6:30, I was fully ready. In my jacket pocket was the photograph Veronica had asked for, though I hadn't decided whether I was going to show it. In the other pocket was my checkbook. I rarely used it, preferring bank transfers or a card, but today I decided to take it just in case. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. Arthur, punctual as always. Wow, Sam, you look like $1,000,000. He whistled when he saw me in my suit. Are you really getting ready for this dinner? My sister-in-law's request, I shrugged. They want to impress the bride's parents. We got into his car, a well-maintained sedan that Arthur kept in perfect condition, even though it was more than 10 years old. So what's the plan? He asked, pulling out onto the road. Are you going to ask me directly what all this comedy's about? No, I'm just gonna watch, see how they act, what they say. Then I'll decide what to do next. Arthur nodded, agreeing with the strategy. Smart. Just don't let them pressure you, especially in front of strangers. It's a classic manipulator's trick. We spent the rest of the drive discussing the last book we'd both read, a historical novel about the colonization of America. Arthur had always been easy to talk to. We shared many interests and outlooks on life. Sometimes I thought he understood me better than my own son. Here we are, Arthur said, pulling up in front of the Côte d'Azur. Call me if anything goes wrong, or if you want to leave early. I'll be in touch. I thanked my friend and got out of the car. The restaurant was in a historic building overlooking the bay. White columns, large windows, and an elegant sign said it was a place for special occasions and fat wallets. Inside, I was greeted by a friendly maitre d' in a perfectly pressed uniform. Good evening, sir. What can I do for you? I have a meeting with the Harrington family. I need a reservation for 7 o'clock. Of course, sir. They've arrived and are waiting for you in the private room. Let me show you out. I followed him through the main dining room, noting to myself the exquisite furnishings, crystal chandeliers, fine linen tablecloths, silverware. The prices in a place like this must have matched the entourage. A separate room was at the back of the restaurant and had panoramic windows overlooking the water. Brandon, Veronica, Trevor, and the young blonde I remembered as Chloe were already seated at the large round table. Next to her was an older couple, obviously her parents. Dad, finally! Brandon came up to me with a strained smile. We were getting worried. I'm right on time, I replied, glancing at the clock. It was exactly 7. Yes, of course, my son agreed quickly and turned to the others. Let me introduce you to my father, Samuel Harrington. Dad, this is Richard and Pamela Courtney, Chloe's parents. Richard Courtney, a sturdily built man about my age with carefully styled gray hair, stood up and extended his hand. Pleased to meet you, Samuel. Heard about you from Brandon. His handshake was firm and his gaze was assessing. He was clearly trying to form his own opinion of me, not relying on my son's words alone. Likewise, Richard, I hope you've heard only good things. I smiled, indicating that it was a joke. Oh, only the best, Pamela interjected, an elegant woman with perfect hair and a flawless manicure. Brandon told me you were the technical director of a major engineering company? I cast a quick glance at my son, who nodded imperceptibly at me, as if asking me to play along. An unpleasant feeling began to creep into my soul. The evening was just beginning, but I could already sense the falseness and tension that seemed to fill the room. Not exactly, I corrected gently. I was the lead process engineer. I led the development of new production lines. Oh, that sounds impressive, Pamela said politely, though it was obvious she was a little disappointed. Grandpa was one of the most respected people in the company, Trevor interjected, clearly trying to make things right. He even has a picture with the president of their corporation. I caught Brandon's pleading look again and, sighing, pulled the picture out of my pocket. Yes, it was at the opening of the new plant. I was in charge of the process. I handed the picture to Richard, trying to sound modest but dignified. He scrutinized the photo, then handed it back to me. Impressive. I started out as a small business myself and gradually expanded. Now we have one of the largest construction companies in the region. Dad built half of the prestigious neighborhoods in Fort Myers, Chloe added proudly, including Seaside Terrace, where Trevor and his parents live. I raised my eyebrows, glancing at Brandon. Seaside Terrace was one of the most expensive apartment complexes in the city. It made sense now why the down payment on their house was $60,000. The total cost of such a place had to be at least twice what they could afford. Yes, we're very happy with the house, Brandon said quickly, clearly trying to change the subject. Why don't we order in? I'm starving. As if on cue, the waiter appeared at the table and handed out menus. I opened mine and almost whistled in surprise. The prices were astronomical even for such a restaurant. The simplest dish cost more than $50, and the specialties were up to $200. I recommend the specialty lobster, Brandon said, addressing everyone. It's the chef's specialty. Sounds wonderful, Veronica agreed, not even looking at the price. $175 per serving. And of course, we have to order good wine. The son continued, studying the wine list. How about this Chardonnay? Harvested 2005 years ago. Excellent millésime. A bottle cost $300. I was beginning to see where this was going, and I didn't like it. But I decided not to interfere, just to watch it unfold. That's an excellent choice, Richard approved. Although, if I may suggest, the Chateau Margaux of 2001 might be a more interesting option. That is, if it's available. Brandon looked a little confused. He clearly wasn't as knowledgeable about wines as he tried to show. Sure, that's a great idea, he agreed and called the sommelier over. The price for a bottle of Chateau Margaux was $800. But Brandon didn't blink an eye, ordering 2 bottles, one for each end of the table. I inwardly shuddered. Even with my savings, such a waste seemed unjustifiable. But that must have been the point, to show off wealth that wasn't really there. Trevor said you were into astronomy, Pamela said to me as the waiter walked away. That's so intriguing. Do you have your own telescope? Yes, a small celestron. But mostly I observe in the observatory at Edison College. We have an astronomy club there, I replied, excited to have something real to talk about. How fascinating. Richard is also a great lover of science, but more archaeology. She looked at her husband with warmth. When I was young, I even participated in several excavations in Mexico, Richard added. Now, of course, I just collect artifacts. Brandon, obviously unhappy that the conversation had drifted away from finances and status, interjected, Dad hasn't been out much lately. He spends all his free time in the garden with his orchids. A real hermit. Orchids? Chloe got excited. I love orchids. Do you have a large collection? About 30 species, I answered, trying not to pay attention to my son's dismissive tone. My wife started mine, and I continued it after her death. It's a beautiful way to honor a loved one, Pamela said quietly. Veronica, who clearly didn't like the direction of the conversation, hurried to intervene. Let's talk about something more fun, like a wedding, for instance. We're thinking of organizing a ceremony on the beach at sunset. White flowers, live music. It would be so romantic. Oh, my mom and I were thinking more like a country club, Chloe objected, casting a questioning glance at her mother. Luckily, at that moment, the appetizers started to be served, which temporarily interrupted the awkward conversation. Brandon ordered oysters with champagne for everyone, though I could see that Trevor didn't like seafood very much. Another proof that the dinner was organized not for the sake of having a good time, but to show off the non-existent wealth. To the happy couple-to-be, Brandon proclaimed, raising his champagne glass. Everyone joined in the toast, and for a while the atmosphere became more relaxed. Richard began to tell funny stories from his youth. Pamela recalled how she met her husband. Chloe and Trevor, sitting next to each other, were talking quietly, smiling at each other from time to time. Perhaps, despite Brandon and Veronica's manipulations, these two really did love each other. When it came to choosing the main courses, Brandon took the lead again. I recommend everyone try the Wagyu steak with truffle sauce. It's amazing. He sounded like he was a regular, though I doubted he'd ever been to this restaurant before today. The steak was $250 a portion. I decided to order something simpler, the salmon fillet, which wasn't cheap either, but still not outrageously expensive. Dad, are you sure? It's a special night. Brandon looked almost offended by my choice. Salmon is my favorite, I replied simply. The wine was served, which the sommelier ceremoniously uncorked and poured into glasses. Brandon pretended to know a lot about tasting, but it was obvious he was just imitating actions he'd seen in movies. Lovely wine, Richard nodded approvingly after a sip. A fine choice. Only the best for the family, Brandon replied with a wide smile, giving me a quick glance. As the first bottle of wine emptied, Brandon became increasingly boisterous and cocky. He began telling stories about his professional successes, most of which I was hearing for the first time and suspected were heavily embellished. Last year I won a case that everyone thought was hopeless, he bragged. The client was so grateful, he sent Veronica and me to the Bahamas for a week. All-inclusive, best hotel. I didn't remember them going to the Bahamas last year, and I was pretty sure the story was a fabrication. More wine was ordered, now sparkling wine for dessert. Brandon insisted that everyone try the famous gold leaf chocolate fondant, an $80 dessert. I limited myself to espresso, as did Richard. By this point, Brandon was thoroughly tipsy. He was loudly telling some dubious story about a celebrity encounter they'd had on vacation, and Veronica was echoing it, adding details that didn't exist. And then I said to him, "Hey, buddy, I'm in show business too. Just the legal part of it." Brandon laughed at his own joke. And he's like, "Give me your card, I might need you." Can you imagine? Chloe smiled politely, but I could see that she was uncomfortable with this obvious invention. Trevor looked embarrassed by his father's behavior, but didn't dare intervene. "Brandon, maybe enough wine?" I suggested quietly, but my son just waved it away. "Relax, Dad. We're celebrating tonight." He refilled his glass again. "Besides, it's not for you to tell me what to do. It's not your age to tell a man in the prime of life what to do." Pamela looked shocked by this rudeness, but she remained silent. Richard frowned but didn't interfere. It was, after all, our family relationship. "Dad's been a real pain in the ass lately," Brandon continued, turning to the table. "He's always talking about saving money, about planning expenses. It's like money isn't for spending. A sensible attitude to finances is the basis of stability," said Richard. "Maybe," Brandon said, "but Father has always been generous to us, hasn't he, Veronica? It was only because of him that we were able to buy the house in Seaside Terrace." I felt the color flood my face. It's one thing to help a family, but it's quite another to be so cavalierly announced to outsiders. "Brandon, this is not a topic for public discussion," I said quietly but firmly. "What's the big deal?" My son laughed. "Everyone knows you support us. You love your family." "We'll talk about this later, Brandon." I tried to stop him, seeing how Chloe's parents tensed up. "But we're all together now. It's time to talk about it," my son insisted. "Maybe a down payment on a house? Or an all-expenses-paid honeymoon? Let's toast to my father. The best wallet on legs you could ever wish for." He laughed, and Veronica and Trevor picked up his laughter. Chloe's parents looked shocked by such a toast, and Chloe herself looked embarrassed. But I myself was the most amazed. Is this how my son really thinks of me? As a purse on legs? The waiter standing next to our table coughed and placed a leather folder with the bill in front of me, as if to remind me that I was expected to pay. At that moment, I made a decision. Calmly rising, I said, "Just a moment, I'll be right there." I headed straight for the restaurant's exit, nodding to the maitre d', who politely opened the door in front of me. It was cool and quiet outside. I took a deep breath of the Fort Myers night air, feeling oddly relieved. Not far from the restaurant, I spotted a cab and waved. The driver, an older Hispanic man with a friendly smile, pulled up beside me. "Where are we going, sir?" I gave him my address and got into the car and leaned back in the seat, feeling the tension of the evening begin to release me. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, I was sure panic was setting in. It had been 15 minutes and I hadn't been back. Brandon was probably starting to realize that I wasn't coming back, and he was going to have to foot the bill of nearly $10,000 himself, an amount he clearly couldn't afford. Chloe's parents had now seen the true face of Brandon's family, and I doubted they were impressed. The cab pulled up in front of my house around 11 p.m. I paid the driver, adding a generous tip. He turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist, talking about his grandchildren in Puerto Rico, whom he saw once a year but always sent money for their education. "Family is all we have, sir," he said in parting. "But sometimes love means not giving them what they want, but what they need." I nodded, marveling at the wisdom that sometimes comes from the most unexpected people. The house greeted me with silence. I turned on the light in the hallway and took off my jacket and tie, tossing them on the couch in the living room. I needed a drink, so I headed straight for the bar where I kept a bottle of 18-year-old Scotch whiskey, a gift from co-workers for my retirement. Pouring myself 2 fingers of the amber liquid, I stepped out onto the veranda. The night was clear, the stars shining brightly in the dark Florida sky. I took a sip and felt warmth spill over my body. What had I just done? Left my son with an exorbitant bill in front of future in-laws. Walked away without explanation, like a resentful teenager. Part of me felt shame for such an act, but the other part, the part that had endured years of neglect and manipulation, felt a strange satisfaction. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Brandon. Of course it was him. I dismissed the call and put my phone on silent. Right now I needed to think, not listen to accusations. I sat down in the wicker chair and stared up at the night sky. How had we gotten to this point? When did my only son start to see me as just a source of money? Was I so blinded by my love for him that I didn't realize I was ruining him with my overprotective care? I remembered how little Brandon took his first steps, how he learned to ride his bike, how I helped him with his homework. He was such a bright, inquisitive child. When did things change? Maybe after Lydia died. No, there were signs before that. His constant demands for expensive things, his belief that he was owed everything just because he was him. Lydia and I gave in too often for fear of disappointing him, for fear of being bad parents. And in the end, we became just that, failing to teach our son the value of labor, respect for money, and care for loved ones. My phone vibrated again. Now it was a message. I reluctantly glanced at the screen. "I hope you're satisfied. You just embarrassed us in front of Chloe's parents. The bill was just huge. I had to borrow from Richard. I had to borrow from my future matchmaker. Do you realize what you've done?" This was followed by another message. "Call me back immediately. We need to talk." I turned the phone off completely. Talking to Brandon right now wouldn't do any good. He was too angry, and I was too frustrated. The morning is wiser in the evening. After finishing my whiskey, I went back inside. Despite my emotional exhaustion, I couldn't sleep. I sat down at the desk and pulled out a piece of paper. I needed to sort out my own thoughts, and sometimes writing things down helped. I started making a list of all the large sums I'd given Brandon and his family over the past 5 years. It was impressive. The down payment on the house, $60,000. A new car for Veronica, $35,000. Trevor's college tuition, about $120,000 over 4 years. Brandon's various investments, another $50,000. Vacations, gifts, unexpected expenses, about $40,000 more. In total, over $300,000 over 5 years. And what did I get in return? Rare visits on holidays, fake smiles and calls only when they needed something. When Lydia was alive, money had never been an issue between Brandon and me. We helped him out, sure, but he didn't take it for granted. Something changed after she died. Maybe he decided that I, left alone, should spend my fortune on them. Or was it simply that without Lydia's restraining influence, his true nature had shown itself more strongly? I put down my pen and leaned back in my chair. What to do now? Continue to indulge their ever-growing appetites, or finally set boundaries? For the first time in a long time, I felt clarity of thought. Today's incident at the restaurant wasn't just an unpleasant episode, it was a moment of truth. I saw how my son really perceived me, and that knowledge, as painful as it was, gave me the freedom to act. In the morning, I woke up with a plan ready to go. After breakfast, I called my longtime acquaintance, Philip Conroy, one of the best family law attorneys in all of Fort Myers. Samuel, haven't heard from you in a while, old boy. How's it going? His loud voice sounded cheerful despite the early hour. I've been better, Phil. I need your professional advice. When can I stop by? Is it serious? There was a note of concern in his voice. It's serious enough to need a lawyer, I said evasively. Come by at 2 this afternoon. I'll have an hour before my next appointment. I thanked him and hung up. Then I turned on my cell phone and found 12 missed calls from Brandon, 8 from Veronica, and 3 from Trevor, as well as a dozen messages demanding I call back and explain my unacceptable behavior. The last message from her son was particularly vivid. If you think you can just disappear and not explain yourself, you're sorely mistaken. We're on our way to your place. We'll be there in an hour. The message had been sent 20 minutes ago. I had 40 minutes to leave if I wanted to avoid a confrontation, and I did want to, at least for now, until I could get my thoughts in order and get legal advice. I took a quick shower, got dressed, and called Arthur. Sam, how was dinner? Judging by the timing of your call, not so good? Shakurai, that's an understatement. I told him briefly about last night's incident. Arthur whistled. Wow, I can't say I'm surprised, but still. What now? Now Brandon and his family are on their way here to have the talk. I'm not ready for that talk. Can I stop by your place for a couple hours? And then I have a meeting with Philip Conroy. The lawyer? You're serious, he said with approval. Sure, come on over. I'll make us a nice coffee. I gathered the necessary paperwork, including copies of bank statements and the list of financial gifts to Brandon I'd made the night before. I grabbed my laptop and headed for the door, but before I left, I wrote a quick note and left it on the coffee table. Brandon, I need some time to process what happened yesterday. We'll talk when I'm ready. Please don't come uninvited. 15 minutes later, I was already at Arthur's, who greeted me with a steaming cup of strong coffee. You look lousy, friend, he said frankly, ushering me into his bright office overlooking a small but well-kept garden. I feel accordingly. I sank into a comfortable chair. You know, the strangest thing is that, along with all the bitterness and disappointment, I feel relieved. It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Because now you see the situation as it is. Without illusions, Arthur nodded, and you can start to change things. We spent the next hour discussing various options. Arthur, as always, was practical and straightforward. Shut off the financial faucet completely, he advised. No half measures, no last chances. Just complete financial independence for them and for you. But what if they really need... Brandon's 45 years old, Sam. He has a law degree which you paid for. Veronica has a college degree too. Trevor's an adult. They can work and support themselves like millions of people do. I knew he was right, but cutting off my own son was an excruciatingly difficult decision. What about the will? I asked. Right now, Brandon is named as the primary heir. That's a question for Philip, Arthur shrugged. But if you want my opinion, think about charity. There are plenty of organizations that do good work and would put your money to good use. At 2:30, I thanked Arthur for his hospitality and headed for Philip Conroy's office. My old acquaintance hadn't changed a bit. Still as big as ever, with a mop of gray hair and shrewd blue eyes. He greeted me with a firm handshake and seated me in a comfortable chair across from his massive desk. So, Samuel, what brings you to me? He asked after the exchange of pleasantries. I took a deep breath and told him the whole story about how my relationship with my son had changed since Lydia's death, about his constant financial demands, about last night's incident at the restaurant. I want to revise my will, I finished, and perhaps take other measures to protect my assets. Philip listened attentively, occasionally making notes on a yellow notepad. I understand your situation, he said when I finished, and I have to say that you are not the first parent to face this problem. Unfortunately, money often poisons family relationships. What's your advice to me? First, let's deal with the will. Do you want to completely exclude Brandon and his family or just limit their share? I've been thinking. Despite all the frustration, I couldn't cut my son off completely from the inheritance. It seemed too final. Maybe there was some compromise option, I asked. I don't want to completely disinherit them, but I don't want them to get everything for nothing either. Philip nodded, tapping his pen on the table. There are several options. You could set up a trust with certain conditions. For example, Brandon only gets access to the funds if he meets certain requirements, say, working full-time or participating in charity work. Or you could divide the inheritance, leaving some to Brandon and some to charities you care about. What about Trevor? He's young and probably not totally screwed up yet. You could set aside a separate share for your grandson, with conditions that would help him become more responsible. For example, funds for education or starting a business, but not for general expenses. We discussed various options, and in the end, I decided to create a balanced bequest. One-third of the estate would remain to Brandon, but with limited access through a trust. One-third would go to Trevor for education, starting a business, or buying his first home, but only after he turned 30. The final third would be distributed to several charitable organizations, including the college's Astronomical Society, Edison and the local botanical garden, which had a collection of rare orchids. That's fair, Philip approved. You're not depriving the family completely, but you're setting certain conditions. Besides, you're supporting causes you care about. What about the current situation? And I asked. I don't want to financially support Brandon and his family anymore, but I'm afraid they will insist. Legally, you don't have to support your adult son and his family, Philip said firmly. You can simply refuse to give them money. But if you want a more formal approach, we can draw up a document in which you declare that your financial support has ceased. It's not legally enforceable, but it could send a clear signal. Let's do that, I nodded. And one more question. What if they try to contest my will after I die, claiming I was incapacitated or acting under duress? That's an excellent question, Philip smiled. There are several steps we can take to protect ourselves. First, I recommend you get a medical examination soon to confirm your mental health. Second, we'll carefully document your reasons for changing your will. And third, I will be personally present at the signing to witness your condition. I was relieved. A plan was beginning to take shape. When can we finalize all this? I'll have the paperwork ready by early next week. In the meantime, I suggest you document all contact with your son and his family. Record conversations, save messages. It could come in handy if this goes to trial. You think it'll come to that? I hope not, Philip replied seriously, but I prefer to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. I left Felipe's office feeling that I had taken the first step in changing my life. Now came the hardest part, meeting Brandon. When I got home, my son's car was in the driveway. He was waiting for me, sitting on the porch with a tense expression on his face. Finally, he exclaimed, jumping to his feet. Do you realize what we went through yesterday? It was humiliating. I walked calmly past him to the front door. Let's talk inside, I said, unlocking the lock. Richard had to pay the bill. Brandon followed me, not stopping his tirade. Richard had to pay the bill. Do you have any idea what that looked like? Like we were some kind of crooks. Chloe is now doubting the wedding, Trevor is depressed, and Veronica won't come out of her bedroom in shame. I hung up my jacket and turned to my son. Sit down, Brandon. We really need to talk. Something in my tone made him stop and look at me carefully. What's going on, Dad? You've been acting weird. First this running away from the restaurant now. It wasn't an escape, Brandon. It was a decision. A decision to no longer participate in the spectacle you put on. What are you talking about? He seemed genuinely confused. I'm talking about the fact that you invited me to an expensive restaurant not to celebrate Trevor's engagement, but to use me, my status, my credit card, to impress Chloe's parents with wealth you don't have. And when I refused to play by your rules, you called me a wallet on legs. Brandon blushed, but quickly pulled himself together. It was just a joke. You got it all wrong. And anyway, you're overreacting. So what if it was dinner at a restaurant? You can afford it. It's not about money, Brandon. It's about respect. It's about how you feel about me and our relationship. I sat down on the couch, feeling suddenly tired. Brandon remained standing with his arms crossed over his chest. I've made a decision, I continued. I will no longer financially support you or your family. No more loans, no more investments, no more gifts. You are adults and must live within your means. It's been 3 weeks since that memorable night at the restaurant. In that time, my life has changed dramatically. Since my visit with Philip Conroy, I have not only revised my will, but I have also rethought many aspects of my daily life. For too long, I had lived in the shadows of the past, confining myself to the role of a banker grandfather that Brandon and his family had imposed on me. It was time to take back control of my own life. The first step was to increase my participation in the astronomy club. Previously, I had simply attended the weekly meetings. Now I volunteered to help organize events. Dr. Henderson, leader of the circle and professor of astrophysics at Edison College, was pleased with my initiative. Samuel, we are about to embark on an expedition to Everglades National Park to observe a meteor shower, he informed me after the next meeting. I need an experienced person to help with the logistics. Interested? In the past, I would have declined, citing age or family obligations. Now I enthusiastically agreed. Within a week, I was already coordinating a group of 15 amateur astronomers, choosing the best places to observe, arranging transportation and meals. The expedition turned out to be an incredible experience. Away from the city lights, under the vast starry Florida sky, I experienced a sense of freedom and awe I hadn't known in a very long time. Meteors cut through the sky in brightly colored strokes, eliciting enthusiastic cheers from onlookers. I felt a part of something bigger than just Brandon's grandpa or a wallet on legs. You've done a great job organizing, Dr. Henderson complimented me as we drove home. Would you like to join the board of our society? We need such energetic and responsible people. I said yes without hesitation. Thus, I found a new purpose in a new sphere of application, where I was valued for my knowledge and enthusiasm, not for the size of my bank account. In addition to astronomy, I decided to pursue a longtime dream of traveling. Not the luxury cruises or five-star hotels that Brandon's family was so fond of, but real educational travel. I started with a week-long tour of the historic cities of Savannah and Charleston, organized by the local historical society. The group was mostly people my age with an interest in history and architecture, and I quickly found common ground with many of them. I was especially pleased to meet Elizabeth Campbell, an elegant widow of 68, a former librarian from Atlanta. She possessed a keen mind, a fine sense of humor, and incredible erudition. We spent many hours discussing the books we had read and sharing our impressions of Charleston's architectural masterpieces. You know, Samuel, she said during our last dinner on the tour, I moved to Florida just 6 months ago after my husband died. I have a daughter and her family here, but I hardly know anyone. It would be wonderful to continue our communication. We exchanged phone numbers and have called regularly since then. Sometimes we would meet at a small cafe on the Fort Myers waterfront, where we would talk for hours about everything from the latest scientific discoveries to classic literature. Elizabeth never asked about my financial situation or hinted at financial assistance, a refreshing change after dealing with her own family. My orchid collection got a new lease on life too. I joined the local orchid society and began experimenting with rarer species. I spent every morning in my small greenhouse, enjoying the silence and beauty of the flowers. It was a kind of meditation, helping me to start the day in a calm, peaceful state. Arthur, my faithful friend, was fully supportive of all my endeavors. Secondo, you've finally begun to live for yourself, Sam, he would say when we met for our weekly game of chess. It was about time, but not everything in my life was rosy. The relationship with Brandon and his family had turned into a cold war. After that conversation when I announced that I was withdrawing my financial support, Brandon didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. Then a series of messages followed. First angry, then begging, then aggressive again. You can't just cut us off from aid. We're your family. Dad, please, let's talk. I was wrong. I overreacted. You're abandoning your son and grandson? What kind of father are you? I answered short and to the point, not giving in to emotional manipulation. Yes, I am still their father and grandfather. No, I'm not abandoning them as family, but I will no longer be their financial backer. That's my firm decision. Trevor called one day when I was working in the garden. His voice sounded uncertain, like he didn't know what to say. Grandpa, I'm really sorry about what happened at the restaurant. I'm sorry too, Trevor, I replied sincerely. It was an unpleasant evening for all of us. Haunting him. Dad says you're not going to help with the honeymoon now, he cut to the chase. That's true, and I confirmed. I'm not giving you or your parents any more money. It's my decision, and it's final. But Grandpa, there was a pitying note in his voice. Chloe and I have been dreaming of Bali. Her parents are paying for the wedding, but they said the honeymoon is our responsibility. And we don't have that kind of money. Maybe we should pick a more affordable destination? The Florida Keys are just as beautiful as Bali, and much closer. It's not the same, he exclaimed. All our friends go to exotic resorts. We'll look poor. I sighed. Those words explained a lot. My grandson, like his father, was obsessed with the appearance of wealth without the means to maintain it. Trevor, in life is not important, not ostentatious luxury, and not the opinion of friends, but true values. If Chloe really loves you, she won't care where to spend her honeymoon. The conversation soon ended, leaving me with a bitter residue. I hoped that Trevor still had a chance to grow up to be a more responsible person than his father, but so far there were no signs of it. A month after the incident at the restaurant, I received an unexpected call from Richard Courtney, Chloe's father. Samuel, I hope I'm not distracting you. His voice sounded friendly but official. I'd like to invite you to lunch. There are some matters I would like to discuss. I agreed, intrigued. We agreed to meet at a small fish restaurant on the waterfront, much more modest than the Azure. Richard was already waiting for me when I arrived. He looked like a man accustomed to affluence but not boastful of it, a quality but not flashy suit, a simple watch, confident manners. Thank you for agreeing to meet me, he said after an exchange of greetings. I wanted to talk about our children. I tensed, expecting accusations or demands. First of all, Richard continued, I want to say that I completely understand your behavior in the restaurant. If I were you, I probably would have done the same thing. It was unexpected. I looked at him carefully, trying to figure out what he was getting at. After that night, Pamela and I had a serious talk with Chloe about her choices, he continued. We were concerned about Trevor's family's attitude toward money and responsibility. Sonam, I understand your concern, I nodded, and I have to admit that I'm partly to blame for shaping that attitude. I've indulged their habit of living beyond their means for too long. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Richard leaned forward. Chloe loves Trevor, it's obvious. But Pamela and I are worried that their marriage will be doomed unless there is a serious change in their approach to finances. What are you suggesting? Sam, I've offered Trevor a job in my company, he replied. Not a management position, of course, but an entry-level position in the marketing department where he can apply his education and learn from professionals. The salary is modest, but enough to start an independent life. I also offered them an apartment in our income building at a reduced rate. Not free, but affordable. I was surprised and touched by this approach. Richard was not just criticizing, but offering a concrete solution that could help the young people get back on their feet. It's a very generous offer, I said sincerely. Did Trevor accept? He's hesitant, Richard frowned slightly. He said he had other plans, but I hadn't heard any specifics. Brandon seems to be against the idea. I'm not surprised, I sighed. Brandon had always thought he deserved better than the starting position, and he taught Trevor the same thing. We continued our conversation, discussing the characters of our children and grandchildren. Despite our different life paths, we found we had a lot in common in our views on parenting, responsibility, and family values. I appreciate your candor, Samuel, Richard said as we said goodbye. Hanari, regardless of the wedding, I'd be happy to continue our acquaintance. We shook hands and I left feeling that I had made another potential friend a rarity at my age. When I got home, I found a message from Veronica on my answering machine. She asked me to call back, her voice sounding worried. I decided not to delay and dialed their number. Samuel, she exclaimed when she heard my voice. Thank you for calling me back. Brandon and I would like to come over tonight, if that's okay. We need to have a serious talk. I agreed, albeit with some wariness. Experience had taught me that serious talk with them usually consisted of asking for money. They arrived at 7 sharp, both unusually reserved and polite. Veronica brought a box of cookies from my favorite bakery, a gesture that in other circumstances I would have appreciated as a show of consideration, but now I took it more as an attempt to placate. Dad, we came to apologize, Brandon began as we settled into the living room. What happened at the restaurant was unforgivable. I was drunk and said some terrible things. I'm so sorry. He looked genuinely remorseful, which lightened my mood a little. I accept your apology, Brandon. The fact that you realize the wrongness of what you said is a good sign. We've both been thinking a lot lately, Veronica said, nervously fixing her perfect style. About our relationship, about how we might have hurt you. We want to make things right. Exactly, Brandon confirmed. We want things to go back to the way they were. We're a family and we need to support each other. I watched them carefully, noting the familiar signs of manipulation, the overly precise phrasing, Veronica's overly emotional tone, Brandon's occasional glances at his wristwatch. Something wasn't adding up here. I'm glad you feel that way, I said gently. Family support is important, but it shouldn't be one-sided. Of course, of course, Brandon agreed hastily. We're here to support you in every way we can. Emotionally, I mean. Spend more time together. Invite you to family dinners. Not at the Côte d'Azur, Veronica tried to make a joke, but it was strained. Speaking of dinners, Brandon cut to the chase. We want to organize an engagement dinner for Trevor and Chloe. At home, intimate. Will you come? Maybe, I answered, not making a firm promise. When are you planning on going? This Saturday. Chloe's parents, her brother and his wife, and you. We've already organized everything. Something in his tone made me wary. We've already organized it, Brandon usually said, meaning we've already paid for it with your money. Sounds good, but I'm not sure I can make it. I have a field trip planned with the Astronomical Society. Dad, Brandon exclaimed with a hint of annoyance in his voice. This is an important family event. Are your stars more important than your grandson? This isn't about priorities, Brandon. This is about commitments already made. I'm in charge of organizing the tour, and 15 people are counting on me. Veronica gave her husband a warning look, and he immediately changed his tone. Of course, I understand. Maybe we could reschedule for another day? When it's convenient for you? We'll have to coordinate it with Chloe's parents. I reminded him of the obvious, but I appreciate your willingness to accommodate my schedule. Yes, of course. Brandon smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. By the way, while we're on the subject of family events, we've had some financial difficulties. So much for the real reason for the visit. I felt disappointed but not surprised. What kind of difficulties? I asked neutrally. Well, you know we live in Seaside Terrace, Brandon began cautiously. The house is beautiful, but the mortgage, the last 2 payments have been pretty stressful. And then there's Trevor's wedding. You said Chloe's parents are paying for the wedding, I reminded you. Yes, the ceremony and the reception, Veronica hastily put in. But there are a lot of other expenses. A suit for Trevor, our outfits, gifts for the guests. And this engagement dinner, Brandon added. We ordered catering from a nice restaurant, bought champagne. I sighed inwardly. They didn't understand anything. Even now, after all the talk about financial responsibility, they continued to live beyond their means and then expected me to cover their expenses. Shorinim, I'm sorry you're in financial trouble, I said firmly, but I will not give you money. My decision didn't change. Brandon straightened up, the mask of politeness beginning to fall away. Dad, you don't understand. This isn't just a whim. We could lose the house. Where are we going to live? There are a lot of options, Brandon. You could sell the house and buy something more affordable. Veronica could get a job. You could look for a better paying position or take on extra cases. A job? Veronica exclaimed as if I had suggested something indecent to her. I haven't worked in 24 years. Who needs me? You're an educated woman with a college degree. There are always opportunities. We can't sell the house, Brandon said stubbornly. It would be humiliating. Everyone would know we're in trouble. So reckon him. What's more important is what you know, I said. And you need to know that you're living beyond your means. And that needs to change. I can't believe you're doing this to us. Brandon stood up, his face contorted with anger. After everything we've been through, you're just abandoning us to our fate. I'm not abandoning you, Brandon. I'm just not sponsoring you anymore. There's a difference. Come on, Veronica. He pulled his wife by the arm. On mocking, there's nothing more for us to do here. Veronica gave me a pleading look, but obediently followed her husband. She turned around at the door. Samuel, please think again. Not for us, for Trevor, his wedding, his future. Trevor is a grown man, I said, and it's time for him to learn to take responsibility for his future on his own, just like you two. They left, slamming the door. I was alone in the living room, staring at the untouched box of cookies. It was bittersweet to realize that our relationship had reached this point, but at the same time I felt strangely relieved, as if I'd dropped a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. I hadn't disowned my family. I just stopped letting them manipulate me through guilt and family duty. And it was the right thing to do, albeit painful. In the evening, I called Elizabeth and invited her to a classical music concert that was to be held the following week. She gladly accepted. We had common interests, mutual respect, and no financial grievances against each other. Exactly the kind of relationship I wanted to see in my life at this stage. Brandon didn't call or write for a full week after their visit. Then came a short message. Trevor and Chloe have postponed the wedding. Richard offered Trevor a job. He accepted. We are selling the house. Thanks for your concern. The last sentence oozed sarcasm, but the rest of the information pleased me. Maybe my grandson had a chance to grow up to be a more responsible man than his father after all. And maybe Brandon was starting to realize the need for change too. I didn't respond to the message, deciding to give them time to cool down and reflect on the situation. My decision remained unchanged. I would no longer be a financial supporter for my family, but the door for real, healthy family relationships remained open, as long as they were willing to accept the new rules of the game. Meanwhile, my own life was becoming more and more fulfilling and interesting. Elizabeth brought new colors and topics of conversation to it. The Astronomical Society provided intellectual stimulation and a sense of belonging to something meaningful. The orchids in my garden bloomed more lushly than ever, as if reflecting my inner state. For the first time in many years, I felt that I was living a full life, not just an appendage to my family's life, and this feeling was priceless, not measurable by any money. On an early October morning, I sat on the veranda of my house with a cup of coffee, watching the rising sun color the sky a soft pink. 6 months had passed since that memorable evening at Azure that had changed my life. 6 months of freedom, discovery, and joy that I hadn't experienced in a very long time. The garden was a riot of color. The orchids in the greenhouse were blooming especially lush this season. I had recently acquired a rare Paphiopedilum, a slipper orchid with amazing purple-green flowers. Elizabeth brought it from the Miami Botanical Garden, where she had connections among the staff. Elizabeth. An involuntary smile appeared on my lips at the thought of her. Over the months, our friendship had grown into something more, not a passionate affair, of course, at our age that would be ridiculous, but a deep, warm affection between two people who understood and valued each other. We spent 3 or 4 days a week together, attending concerts, exhibitions, lectures at Edison College, just walking along the coast, enjoying conversation and the sea breeze. Sometimes I cooked dinner for her. Lydia had taught me a few specialties that I could now make with my eyes closed. And sometimes Elizabeth invited me over to her place, surprising me with culinary delights from different cuisines around the world. Last month, we traveled to Key West together for 3 days, a little trip that provided a wealth of experiences. We toured the Hemingway House Museum, walked around the historic part of town, and had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the sunset. And all the while, I didn't have to worry about anyone expecting me to pay bills or give expensive gifts. Elizabeth was financially independent and never hinted at even the slightest bit of material help. "You know what I like about you, Sam?" she said one evening as we sat on the beach watching the stars. "You're a good listener. Really listen, not just wait for your turn to speak." That simple compliment meant more to me than all the fake praise I'd ever gotten from Brandon and Veronica. My relationship with my family had changed dramatically in those 6 months. After I steadfastly refused to continue funding them, Brandon and Veronica actually sold the house in Seaside Terrace and moved to a more modest residence in the suburbs. Trevor accepted Richard's offer and started working for his construction company, and he and Chloe's wedding was postponed until the following year. To better prepare, as officially explained. Our contacts became infrequent and formal. Brandon called about once a month, and the conversations were short and strained. Veronica sent a card for my birthday, a duty greeting without a personal touch. Trevor texted occasionally, talking about his new job. From the looks of it, he was really trying to change for the better. I didn't feel bitter about the estrangement. On the contrary, it gave me the opportunity to focus on the things that really brought me joy. Astronomy, gardening, new friends, spending time with Elizabeth. My life became richer and fuller without the toxic relationships that used to drain so much energy and resources. The Edison College Astronomical Society elected me to the board of directors, an unexpected honor that I accepted gratefully. I now helped plan events, organize observations, and even occasionally gave small lectures to newcomers. Feeling that my experience and knowledge was valued was incredibly uplifting. I also volunteered at the local botanical garden, where I gave tours once a week, teaching visitors about orchids and other exotic plants. People were often surprised to learn that the guide was a former industrial engineer, not a professional botanist. But my love of plants and years spent studying specialized literature have made me a true expert in this field. On this quiet October day, I planned to work in the garden. And in the evening, Elizabeth and I had plans to go to the theater for the premiere of a classic play. Life was peaceful and pleasant, just the way I wanted it to be. The doorbell rang around 10 in the morning when I had just finished pruning the rose bushes along the driveway. When I opened the door, I saw Brandon, tense. His eyes reddened as if he hadn't slept well. "We need to talk," he said without greeting. "Can I come in?" I stepped back, letting him into the house. He walked into the living room and stopped, looking around like he was seeing everything for the first time. "Did you redecorate?" he asked, noticing the new curtains and rearranged furniture. "Just a small update," I answered. "Elizabeth helped me pick out the colors and fabrics." "Elizabeth?" He repeated the name with barely concealed irritation. "Your new friend that Trevor is talking about?" "Yes, we're pretty close." I saw no point in hiding the obvious. "But I doubt you're here to discuss my personal life." Brandon sank heavily into his chair. "No, of course not. I came to talk about the will." I tensed. No one but me, Philip, and Arthur knew about my new will, or so I thought. "What exactly do you want to discuss?" I asked cautiously. "Don't pretend you don't understand," he said sharply. "Philip Conroy called me. He said that, as my former mentor, he felt it was appropriate to warn me about my father's change in inheritance plans." I mentally cursed. Philip wasn't authorized to divulge the details of my will, but apparently he'd seen fit to give Brandon some kind of hint. Professional ethics versus personal ties is an old dilemma. "What exactly did he say to you?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "Just that you'd revise the will and that I should talk to you directly." Brandon stepped forward. "So come on, Dad. Tell me the truth. Did you disinherit us?" "Not completely," I answered honestly. "I changed the distribution of the assets, created trust with certain conditions for you and Trevor, and decided to give some of it to charitable organizations." Brandon's face contorted with anger. "Charities? You're giving our money to outsiders?" "It's my money, Brandon," I said firmly. "Money I've earned over 40 years of work, and I have every right to use it as I see fit. But we're your family." He was almost shouting now. "That money should stay in the family." "Family isn't just blood ties, Brandon. It's mutual respect, caring, support, and our relationship over the last few years. You're the one who called me purse on legs, Rush, remember?" He dismissed it as if it meant nothing. "It was a stupid joke," drunkenly said. "Do you still hold a grudge against me because of that?" "It's not about resentment," I shook my head. The phrase was just the tip of the iceberg. It just exposed what had been going on for years. "You saw me as a source of money, not a father." "That's not true," he exclaimed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "Brandon, when was the last time you asked me about my health, not in passing, but genuinely interested? When you were interested in my hobbies? When you came just to see me, not to ask me for money?" He was silent, avoiding my gaze. "You see," I continued softly, "and you mean to say that you care about my money for family reasons? Or are you just worried that you won't be able to go back to your old lifestyle after I'm gone?" Brandon stood up abruptly, his face flushed. "You have no right to talk to me like that. I am your son. I'm entitled to a portion of your fortune. Legally, you have the right to contest the will," I replied calmly. "But you should know that I have taken all the necessary measures to ensure that my will is carried out. A medical examination, a detailed explanation of my motives, authoritative witnesses. You could spend years and thousands of dollars in litigation, but the result would be the same." He looked at me in disbelief, like he was seeing me for the first time. "You've thought this through, haven't you? Planned how to deprive us of what we're owed?" I've planned how to use what I've earned, I corrected him. And by the way, you're not completely disinherited. A third of my fortune will go to you through a trust, a third to Trevor for education and business, and a third to charitable organizations. A trust? He asked. What does that mean? It means you'll receive monthly payments, not the whole amount at once. And there are conditions. You have to work, lead a productive life. If you decide to live on welfare or find other ways to avoid working, the payments stop. Brandon laughed, but there was no mirth in his laughter. You want to control me even from the grave? That's that's a sick perversion. It's not control, Brandon. It's an incentive to become an independent man who can provide for himself and his family. What about this Elizabeth of yours? Elizabeth? He suddenly asked. Does she get a share too? Is that why she's with you? For the money? I felt anger rising inside me. It's one thing to accuse me, but it's quite another to affect Elizabeth, who has never shown the slightest interest in my financial situation. Elizabeth is financially independent, I replied coldly. And no, she is not in my will. We are together not for money, but because we are good to each other. A concept I'm afraid you have trouble grasping. Of course it is, Brandon snorted. Serisarinarum, two lonely old wrecks finding each other. How touching. I'd ask you to leave. My voice turned icy. Right now. I'd love to. He headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold. You know what, Dad? You think you're teaching me a lesson, but really you're just throwing away years of relationships. When you die alone, because that Elizabeth of yours isn't likely to stick around when she realizes she's getting nothing. No one will even come to your funeral. If people only come to funerals when they expect an inheritance, they'd better not come at all, I said calmly. Goodbye, Brandon. The door's always open to you if you want a real relationship, not a financial one. He left, slamming the door so hard that the window panes rattled. I sank into the chair, feeling both devastated and strangely relieved at the same time. The final confrontation I'd feared for so long had happened, and I'd handled it with dignity. For a while, I just sat there looking out the window at my manicured garden. Then I pulled out my cell phone and called Arthur. Brandon came by, I said without preamble when my friend answered. He heard about the will from Philip. Oh, shit, Arthur cursed. Conroy shouldn't have. It's already happened, I interrupted. It doesn't matter how, it matters what. He's furious, threatening lawsuits and saying I'm throwing away family relations. And you what? Said that real relationships aren't based on money and that I'm ready for one if he is too. Good point, Arthur approved. And how did he react? Sure. Slammed the door, I grinned wryly. I don't think we'll be having family dinners anytime soon. His loss, Arthur said firmly. Look, Sam, you did the right thing. Your decision not to completely disinherit them, but to set conditions is a wise compromise. If Brandon can't appreciate that, that's his problem, not yours. We talked some more, and I felt better. Arthur always knew how to find the right words. In the evening, I met up with Elizabeth, and we went to the theater. I didn't tell her about Brandon's visit. I didn't want to mar the evening. We enjoyed the play and then had dinner at a small Italian restaurant, discussing the actor's performance and the director's decisions. As I walked her home, she suddenly asked, Are you okay, Sam? You've seemed a little distant all night. I wondered if I should tell her, and I decided yes. Elizabeth deserved to know what she would have to face if she stayed in my life. I had an unpleasant conversation with my son today, I admitted, and briefly described the situation. She listened carefully, without interrupting. You're in pain, she said finally. It's natural. No matter how difficult your relationship is, he's still your son. And to hear such things from your own child, yes, it hurts, I agreed. But at the same time, I feel like I did the right thing, that I'm finally living up to my values instead of living up to someone else's expectations. It's a sign of strength, Sam. She squeezed my hand gently. And you should know that I admire you for it. A lot of people our age just go with the flow, afraid to make a change. But you had the courage to start a new chapter in your life. It wasn't hard with good company, I smiled at her. At home, I couldn't sleep for a long time, pondering the day's events. Of course, Brandon's words had hurt me. He was my only son, and despite my differences, I loved him. But I also realized that I couldn't continue to indulge his irresponsibility. It wouldn't help him, Trevor, or even myself. My new will wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of love. Perhaps tough love, but love nonetheless. I hope Brandon would realize that someday. Trevor called the next morning. His voice sounded strained but polite. Grandpa, Dad told me about the situation. I just wanted to say that I understand your decision. And whatever happens between you two, I'd like to maintain a relationship with you. Thank you, Trevor. I was genuinely touched. It means a lot to me. How are things going at work? Good, actually. He sounded revitalized. Richard entrusted me with a small project, a marketing campaign for a new apartment complex. I'm a little nervous, but excited too. I'm sure you'll do a great job, I said sincerely. If you need any help, not financially, but with advice or anything else, I'm always here for you. Thank you, Grandpa. Chloe and I would like to invite you to lunch on Sunday. If you're not busy, of course. I'd love to come, I replied, feeling my heart grow warm. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe Trevor could see what had escaped his father's attention, that real relationships aren't built on money, but on mutual respect and genuine interest. In the following weeks, I continued to live my new life, savoring every aspect of it. Elizabeth and I became even closer, spending almost all of our free time together. She introduced me to her daughter and grandchildren, who welcomed me warmly. I visited Trevor and Chloe, saw their new apartment, and was happy to notice that my grandson was really changing for the better. Brandon had not been in touch. Veronica sent a short message saying that she and Brandon were very disappointed in my decision and hoped I would come to my senses. I didn't respond. There was no point in repeating what I'd already said. One evening, sitting on the veranda with Elizabeth and watching the stars, I realized that for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from manipulation, free from guilt, free from having to conform to other people's expectations. What are you thinking about? Elizabeth asked quietly. About how strange life is, I answered. Sometimes you have to lose something important to gain something even more valuable. She nodded understandingly and squeezed my hand. We continued to look at the stars, enjoying the moment in each other's company. On this quiet evening, I was sure that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would meet them, because I was finally living my own life, not the one that someone else thought was right for me. And that was true freedom.